Vocals are arguably the most difficult and important aspect of a mix to get right. So I'm going to share with you what I've learned over the past 10 years and distill it down into 5 tips for better vocals. Let's start by understanding standard routing. Now, I'm not sure if this concept has a name, so I'm just calling it standard routing. It's a very logical progression of inserts that starts with subtractive and corrective EQ, followed by de-essing, compression, tuning if it's needed, saturation, temporal processing, and then one last EQ. So the first EQ balances out the sound by attenuating any frequencies and ranges that are too aggressive. De-essing then balances the sibilance, which then feeds the signal into our first additive processor, compression. The compressor receives a cleaner signal, meaning when we introduce post-compression makeup gain, we're amplifying a balanced signal. Then, the tuner has an upfront signal to tune with all of the quieter details emphasized to help it determine the pitch more accurately. Saturation could then be used to give the vocal a unique timbre and further control dynamics. Temporal processing like delay and or reverb give the vocal a sense of depth while introducing a stylistic element, while the final EQ lets us have final say over the frequency response. Now, this is the chain that I use about 70% of the time, since it just follows such a consistent structure that makes problems easy to identify and then fix. Now, I'm going to use free and stock plugins so that you can emulate the chain if you like, but be sure to tailor the settings to your specific performance. Let's take a listen to the before and after.
Bar fights and sleepless nights, another day's another blur. Anything to make me feel the way I did with her. Bar fights and sleepless nights, another day's another blur. Anything to make me feel the way I did with her.
The next tip is to use multiple tuning methods. So when tuning a vocal, most people stick to one vocal tuning method, but like compressors or saturators or any other insert, it helps to try a couple options out and see what works best. For example, when you're tuning, you could try both traditional auto-tune style tuners and the Melodyne note correction style and see which one creates the sound that you're going for. Now, personally, I like to tune with EQ, saturation, and some chorus effects. With an EQ, I could emphasize in-key notes by amplifying them. Then with a saturator, I can create in-key even-ordered harmonics with most warm tube settings. Then with a chorus effect or a harmony generator, I can create mild to moderate delay in the tuning to multiple vocal taps to create a generalized pitch that's closer to in tune than the original vocal's singular signal. Now, it might not sound as in tune as a tuner does, but it definitely sounds more natural. So let's listen to these 3 different methods. I'll have to use some paid plugins for this demo, but there are some free tuners out there if you want to try them, like M-Auto Pitch.
Bar fights and sleepless nights, another day's another blur. Bar fights and sleepless nights, another day's another blur. Bar fights and sleepless nights, another day's another blur.
The next tip is to utilize in-time processing. So almost every type of processor could be made in time with the session or the BPM if a set tempo is being used. Although the math is the same for each processor type, there are some small changes to make between timing reverb, timing compression, delay, and modulated saturation. The equation is just 60,000 divided by the BPM. So say the session is 120 BPM. I divide 60,000 by 120. The result is 1 quarter note in milliseconds. In this instance, 500 milliseconds or half a second is 1 quarter note. Now, time and delay is probably the most straightforward. It's going to sound in time, and most delay plugins already include tempo synced settings that keep it easy. But for reverb, it's a little different in that the math offers just a good starting point, so to speak. But then you need to adjust it. For example, say I want a whole note decay with my reverb. Again, if the session is 120 BPM, then 500 milliseconds is a quarter note, and 2000 milliseconds or 2 seconds would be the whole note. Now, I'd start with 2 seconds, but then I'd lengthen it within the context of the mix. Since the rest of the instrumentation is going to mask the reflections, especially near the tail end of the reverb, it'll need to be increased to still be perceived as a whole note. Now for compression, again we're going to use the same equation, but the attack time needs to be accounted for and subtracted from the release time. For example, if I want 1/8 note of attenuation, which in our example is 250 milliseconds, and I want an attack of 10 milliseconds, the release would need to be set to 240 milliseconds to keep everything in time. Additionally, the threshold, the knee, ratio, and other settings would need to be accounted for to ensure that attenuation is occurring in time with the song. Lastly, for modulated saturation, which isn't too common, you'd use an envelope follower and, like compression, time the attack and the release to equal the time of the note that you want. So let's listen to the standard chain, but with each form of processing timed to the track's BPM. Now, it may be a preference thing, but I think that the performance sounds a bit more musical and it fits in better with the surrounding instrumentation.
Bar fights and sleepless nights, another day's another blur. Anything to make me feel the way I did with her. Bar fights and sleepless nights, another day's another blur. Anything to make me feel the way I did with her.
Before we move on, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, check out our Sage Audio membership. Just for signing up, you receive 50 free mastered songs per year with your own dedicated mastering engineer, direct one-on-one mentorship that's tailored to your specific mixing needs, unlimited mixing feedback to help improve your mixes, access to Sage Audio University's in-depth mixing and mastering courses, and a lot more. But more on that at the end of the video. Next up, let's talk about understanding the Fletcher-Munson curve. Now, I talked about this before, but I'm going to combine a few important concepts here and create a new graphic that tied the ideas together. In short, we're most sensitive to the range between 2 to 5 kilohertz. The Fletcher-Munson curve shows this, which is based on multiple tests that have been performed over the decades, but the way that it's shown is kind of confusing. Inverting it makes more sense, in which the x-axis represents frequency and the y-axis represents our sensitivity to that frequency. Then we have to understand masking. Although more research is definitely needed, 300 Hz was determined in the 1950s to be the most dominant masking frequency of higher ranges. Now, this red translucent overlay represents the frequencies that are affected by 300 Hz. Now, any form of processing, be it EQ, compression, saturation, reverb, delay, tuning, and so on, will affect the frequency response. If your saturator increases 3.5 kHz by introducing harmonics in that area, it's going to make the vocal easier to hear by increasing the range to which we're most sensitive. Now, if your processing amplifies 300 Hz, on the other hand, it's going to make the vocal harder to hear since those frequencies will mask 3.5 kHz. Although all frequency ranges are important, I always pay particular attention to the low mids and the high mids since the relationship between the two have a huge impact on the clarity and the intelligibility of the vocals. So let's listen to processing that improves the balance between these two ranges and then processing that makes the ranges unbalanced.
Bar fights and sleepless nights, another day's another blur. Anything to make me feel the way I did with her. Bar fights and sleepless nights, another day's another blur. Anything to make me feel the way I did with her.
The last tip I have for you, and I kind of learned this the hard way, is don't overuse resonance processors. So resonance processors like Soothe 2 are pretty new and they're definitely being overused. Now, one of the more questionable popular uses for this plugin is placing Soothe 2 on the instrumental with the vocal sidechained. The idea is that space for the vocal is attenuated by finding resonances where the two tracks overlap. Now, this is kind of lazy at best and it's going to be detrimental to the quality of the mix at worst. So don't do it unless you're making a demo and you just want to alter some things quickly. Additionally, if you're having to use more than 6 dB of overall attenuation on the vocal using these types of plugins, then there's something definitely wrong with the vocal. Use EQ, compression, and other forms of processing to adjust the frequency response while using this plugin as a guide. Also, know that these types of plugins might not be well suited for your genre or your vocal style. For example, if you've purposely heavily distorted a vocal, resonance processors will drastically affect the timbre in a way that doesn't augment the vocal. Now, these are very well-designed plugins, especially Soothe 2. Just be sure that you don't use them when they're not needed or on every track, since they'll all start sounding too similar. So let's listen to Soothe 2 being unnecessarily used on a vocal and notice how it doesn't really augment the vocal in any particular way.
Bar fights and sleepless nights, another day's another blur. Anything to make me feel the way I did with her. Bar fights and sleepless nights, another day's another blur. Anything to make me feel I did with her.
As I mentioned earlier, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, check out our Sage Audio membership. Just for signing up, you receive 50 free mastered songs per year with your own dedicated mastering engineer, direct one-on-one mentorship that's tailored to your specific needs, unlimited mixing feedback to help improve your mixes, and access to Sage Audio University for in-depth mixing and mastering courses. Your dedicated mastering engineer will learn your sound and craft masters specific to your preferences. And you also get unlimited revisions to ensure that every master sounds exactly how you want. The one-on-one mentorship gives you personalized mixing guidance tailored to your specific needs. Get all your questions answered with fast communication and receive unlimited advanced mixing feedback and suggestions for improvement. Coupled with the one-on-one mentorship, you also get access to Sage Audio University, where you'll find our in-depth mixing and mastering courses, walkthrough sessions for multiple genres, multi-track project files for hands-on practice, and a Sage Audio certification document for completing the courses. Additionally, you'll be able to enter our mixing and mastering competitions to win prizes while growing your skills alongside a tight-knit group of audio engineers. Inside the membership, you'll have access to the Sage Audio community, which is full of passionate producers and engineers ready to have meaningful discussions, network, and collaborate. The membership also includes over 70 gigabytes of downloadable content, including mixing and mastering chains, multi-tracks for mixing practice, recommended free plugins, recommended paid plugins, and plugin presets. Furthermore, you get direct access to our full catalog of 700 in-depth mixing and mastering videos specifically created to help you improve every aspect of your mixes. Every day, we hear great wins in the membership from producers and engineers noticing a massive improvement in their mixes after joining. Use the link in the description today to join the Sage Audio membership and start creating mixes that sound like professional songs.